In the world of wealth creation, it's important for you to understand every single risk and then ensure that you put a strategy to minimize, mitigate, or transfer that risk. And so that's why we talk about personal insurances, we talk about emergency reserves. And one of the other things that you can do to manage investment risk is diversification. Diversification is probably a very commonly used word that's thrown around a lot in the finance industry. A lot of people will talk about diversification, but they don't really practice it. And unless you practice something, you're not really going to experience the benefits of it. So diversification simply means dividing your money across various asset classes, and even within an asset class, it's dividing your money in such a way that you do not have too much exposure to any one thing. Now, you can become over-diversified as well, and you want to avoid that. Over-diversified means that you own so little of everything that you don't own enough of anything, and we don't want to do that. But sufficient diversification is important. Now, the thing with diversification is that the first thing you want to understand about diversification is that diversification does not equal a collection of assets or investments. Diversification simply means that you have a collection of assets that are negatively correlated, meaning that they don't all react and respond to market movements in the same manner. So let me give you an example. Sometimes I'll have people who come to me in my advisory practice and they will tell me that they are diversified in their investment portfolio. But when I really delve deep into their investment portfolio, many times I'll find that they either have, even though they may have multiple shares as an example, all of those shares are in one industry, or they have 5 or 6 different companies and maybe they're only in 2 industries. Or maybe they have 10 companies, but they're only all in one country. Even though they may be diversified at the industry level, they're not diversified at the geographical level. So diversification is really just applying some sense and saying, okay, I want to make sure that I'm not overly concentrated in any one asset class. So, because if something was to impact that asset class, I don't want all of my investments going down at the same time. Sometimes I get people who may have a number of investment properties, but then again, when you really go deeper, you find that all of their investment properties are either just flats, or they're all big houses, or they're all in the same region. And so again, that brings a lot of concentration risk. So the diversification effectively reduces concentration risk. And if you say, for example, have large companies and you have mid-sized companies and you have small companies, you're effectively reducing your risk, because say there was something that was to happen in an economy and large and mid-sized companies were to be affected, the fact that you've also got some exposure to small companies may offset some of that risk, because the small companies may perform better, even though the mid-sized companies and large companies have plateaued. Same thing with residential property. Let's just say that you have a commercial property and you have a residential property, and something happens and commercial property is badly impacted. By having some residential property in your portfolio just means that you can absorb that risk a little bit more. Even across asset classes, imagine just having all of your money in the share market. So even if you are diversified at the industry level and the geography level, because you're invested in the share market, if the entire global market is affected by a global pandemic, let's just say, then again, you may find that all of your investments fall in value. So the ability to think through your investment strategy and say, look, I don't want to be overexposed to one asset class, whether it's real estate or cash and bonds or stocks, but having adequate exposure across all of them, but also within each asset class, making sure that I'm not over-concentrated in one single strategy. So when we sit down with clients, for example, and we're talking about the merits of the share market, and we tell them how in the long term, share markets are probably one of the best places to invest. And if you allow compounding to take its course over the long term, you can create a lot of wealth in the share market. But one of the things you want to do is, of course, once you have your emergency reserves in place and you have your protection plan in place, within the investments, you also want to be diversified as an extra buffer or extra layer of protection and risk mitigation. So we may have a client and we might say, look, based on the amount of time that you have before you stop working, based on your understanding of volatility and risk, and based on your objectives, let's put a certain amount of money in the share market. But when we invest that money in the share market, we may say, look, let's have some large companies, some mid-sized companies, some small companies, but let's make sure that the companies are also diversified across various industries, so you don't have industry risk. But also let's make sure that the companies are diversified across different countries, so you don't have country and political risk. And then also, if you're going to be investing in those companies indirectly through ETFs and fund managers, then also let's just make sure that they're diversified at the fund manager level, so that you're not investing too much of your money through one or two fund managers. Because sometimes what can happen is, even though you are well diversified at the market level, where you have exposure to a wide variety of companies across different industries and different countries, but if you've got all of your money sitting with one or two fund managers, then that can represent fund manager risk. Because even though the markets might be doing well, if the fund manager mismanages your money or they go out of business, then again your return can be impacted. So really, diversification is really about thinking through, I don't want too much exposure to anything, but I want enough exposure. Like, as a general rule, we don't want our clients to have any more than 5% exposure of the entire wealth in any one company. Okay, we don't want that. Even with real estate, we don't want them to have too much exposure, like 50, 60, 70% of their exposure in one asset class. And even if they have a lot of exposure in one asset class, then we're always thinking about how we can reduce the risk within that asset class by making sure that the properties are geographically diversified. So diversification is just a way of managing your risk. And if you're managing your risk, meaning you are not going to lose money a lot. And if you're not losing money a lot, you naturally make money a lot. Because Warren Buffett's two rules of investment: rule number one, do not lose money, and rule number two, never forget rule number one. So when we are playing the game of wealth creation, not only do we want to maximize our returns, we also want to minimize our risk at the same time. And it's a bit like having one foot on the accelerator and one on the brake at the same time. Whereas imagine having both your feet on the accelerator. Sure, you're going a lot faster, but the moment another car comes in, you're going to end up having a collision because you were not prepared to apply the brakes. And so all of these strategies that I talk about are a way for you to apply the brakes or reduce the speed, because it's not the speed that's going to make you wealthy, it's the distance, how far you go, that's going to make you wealthy. And one of the best ways to go really further on your wealth creation journey is to make sure that you don't have any significant collisions along the way. That's what risk mitigation does. It ensures that you go a long way. You may not be the fastest driver, but you are the safest driver. And because you're the safest driver, you're going to end up going the furthest. And that's really what wealth creation is about, because the further you go, the more you allow compounding to take its effect and create that wealth for you, so that you can give yourself the best chance to become a future millionaire.